Well, good afternoon. I
What?
want to take the
Oh, okay.
opportunity to thank everybody for coming to the Science
Oh, good,
Cafe
good.
here at the Bump in Buffalo. My name is Kara Hetland, and I am the news director with South Dakota Public Broadcasting. And we're going to talk public health today. But before I introduce Lon Keitlinger, just a few housekeeping items. You know, this is very casual, very laid back. Feel free to order more food. If you need your glass refilled, that's fine too. So thank you for that. Also, Dr. Keitlinger has a slide presentation and he has them printed out. So if you need a copy of his slides, if you can't quite see from where you're at, flag me down. I have extra copies so you can kind of follow along as well. So let me know. You know, part of my job in hosting the Science Cafe is to tell funny jokes. But I Googled funny epidemiology jokes, but all I got were the explanations. Thank you for finding them funny. And then I realized the error of my ways, and I took the word funny out and just Googled epidemiology jokes. But the sample size was so small that I really didn't have anything to share. Huh? Come on.
I get it. I get it.
Do you get it? All right. But I do have a word of warning when we talk about epidemiology, and that is one way to really excite an epidemiologist is to cause an effect. So just keep your warning. Huh? I'm not doing very well, Dr.
No.
Keitlinger. All right. So now we'll move past the joke portion. How's that? So Dr. Lon Keitlinger is the state epidemiologist for the South Dakota Department of Health. He is the principal disease monitor and disease investigator for the state. Some of his areas of interest include prevention and control of parasitic and infectious diseases, especially in children. Dr. Keitlinger has traveled the world. He grew up in Selby in north central South Dakota. He received his undergraduate degree in biology at Augustana College, his graduate degree in public health from Tulane University in New Orleans and University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He was awarded a Fulbright grant to carry out foreign disease research, and he worked for about 20 years in Madagascar as a public health missionary with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. He returned to South Dakota in 1998. He has one son, and he has lived in Pierre since he returned. So I give you now Dr. Keitlinger and his presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kara. And to me, too, it seems really odd that you'd have a public health epidemiologist coming out here to neutrino days. And I guess being the state epidemiologist for South Dakota makes me one of the top nerds in the state. And now the neutrino physicists, they work at a submolecular or a subatomic level with much precision and much control. Whereas in my field of science, we work at a macro population level, and it gets very, very messy. However, I think it's equally as fascinating as what the physicists do. What I deal with is disease, health events, health conditions, data, statistics, outbreaks, epidemiologists, or epidemics, but our primary goal is the prevention of disease. So keep that in mind. So let's look at South Dakota epidemiology, a smattering of a lot of things from birth to death and some diseases in between. And we'll do this just to raise points of discussion, which Kara will lead here in a second. So I'm going to go through several different topics here, and I'll deal with births, infant mortality, obesity, West Nile, Lyme disease, some emerging infectious diseases, HIV, and then end up with mortality or death in South Dakota. Okay, so the first slide up here, and I guess that's the only place in the room that we can see them. Oh, over here too. Yeah, sorry. This slide shows the births in South Dakota over the past century. We have 100 years worth of data here. The blue lines are the births per year in the state. And you can see how back in the early days, and then the baby boom there, taking that huge chunk of births there, which I'm a member of, from the late 40s to the early 1960s. And then we dipped down, much fewer births in the 1970s, increasing with that second bump in the 1980s, then back down again in the 1980s, going up into the 2000s, and then the recession hit and we went down, and now we're back up again to about 12,000 births in the state. We peaked here in the mid-1950s with nearly 20,000 births per year in the state, and became much lower in the 1980s when we barely cracked 10,000 births in the state. The blue line is infant mortality. Unfortunately, we do lose babies in South Dakota before they reach their first year of life. And we feel that infant mortality is one of these basic indicators of a society's well-being. The healthier a society is, the lower the infant mortality rate should be. And that's shown in the red line here. And you can see that it was very high at levels almost reaching sub-Saharan Africa back in the early 1910s and 1920s, and then decreasing during the 30s and 40s, being brought down lower and lower and lower. And unfortunately now we've stagnated and we've come to a valley or a plateau here. And this decrease in infant mortality is due to a lot of things. Better health care, vaccination, pasteurization, clean water, better sanitation. So let's step back and look globally. Let's look at the whole world for infant mortality. The darker the slide, the darker the country is, the higher the infant mortality is. So South Africa, parts of South Africa, South Asia have very high infant mortality rates, whereas the lowest rates are in Western Europe, Japan, Australia. Unfortunately, we in the United States, we do not have the lowest infant mortality rate in the world. If South Dakota were an independent country, our infant mortality rate would be the same as Chile or the United Arab Emirates. Now, drilling down to a level lower, we come to the country level. And here we can see South Dakota is not among the states with the best infant mortality rates. In fact, we rank 30th in the whole country. At the top, we find Massachusetts, Utah, and Washington State having the best or the lowest infant mortality rate. But at the other end, we find Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi at the low end. In our neighborhood, in our region, South Dakota, we have the lowest infant mortality rate of any state in our contiguous 7-state region. Now let's drill down one step lower so we can look at the state of South Dakota and see where we stand county by county. The counties with the darkest color are those with the highest infant mortality rates, and the lightest color are those with the lowest or the best. We've had about 6 counties over the past decade that have had no infant deaths at all, and they are Campbell County, Hawken, Harding, Hyde, Gerald, and Minor County. All fairly low population counties, but nevertheless, to have gone over a decade with no infants dying before their first birth is a remarkable achievement. On the other end of the slide, we have several states that have quite high infant mortality rates of 10 and over, and they are Lyman, Hyde, Todd, Moody, Corson, Charles Mix, Buffalo, Shannon, Jackson, Ziebach, and Millette County. So what are we to do about that? Well, there are direct interventions that can help babies achieve their first birthday. Things like a safe place and a safe manner for babies to sleep, good, accessible prenatal care, and home visits during the first year in life. Looking back just in more recent times, since 1960, we can see that the infant mortality rate and the number of deaths in South Dakota has decreased dramatically from when I was a baby and after. But what's happened now in the 2000s is we've not been able to go any lower. We remain at about 7 babies per 1,000 dying before they reach their first year of life. So Governor Dugard has appointed a task force to work on this, and it's led by his wife, Linda Dugard, and she's shown here holding her grandchild there. And our First Lady of South Dakota is putting a lot of effort into assuring that our babies in South Dakota have a safe place to sleep, a safe manner to sleep, have accessible prenatal care. And another problem we have in South Dakota is a high rate of pregnant mothers who smoke. Some of the risk factors are young mothers, single mothers, and mothers who smoke. So a big effort is being made to reach mothers who smoke and get them to quit before they become pregnant, and especially during they become pregnant, and then after the baby is born, not smoking in the presence of the baby, and this will help reduce the infant mortality rate. So I hope you've seen this poster and this ad on TV reaching out to the young mothers to help them stop smoking. Now, we're going to talk about several topics today and shift radically to obesity. For the past 20 years, there's been an obesity epidemic in the United States and here in South Dakota. The map shows the rates of the states. South Dakota, we're right at about the national median. Our rate is 27.7 adult South Dakotans are obese. And the definition of obese is you take your weight and your height and you do a calculation and you get what they call the BMI. And if that's over 30, and then you're categorized statistically as obese. Now my BMI is overweight but not obese. It's about 28. So if I was to gain about 10 more pounds, I would be obese. Ideally, I should lose 15 pounds, just to give you a little bit of judgment here. Some of our neighboring states are doing quite well, like Minnesota, which has an obesity rate of 25. Montana is at 28, all better than us. The state with the best rate, the lowest rate, is Colorado with a rate of 21. The state with the highest obesity rate is Mississippi at 34.5. Back 20 years ago, or not even 20 years ago, in 1995, the obesity rate in South Dakota was 13.5. So our obesity rate in this state has doubled over the past, 17, 18 years. So we definitely have an epidemic of obesity, not an infectious disease, but it has doubled in the past 16 years. Looking at obesity in our South Dakota cities. This is a graph here, another way of displaying data, and on this part we're showing the South Dakota cities and then some cities in the region. So for the city of Rapid City, the obesity rate is 27. Sioux Falls is also 27, and it's good when our two biggest cities are about the same. They don't have to be battling each other. But Aberdeen has a higher rate at 30. Pierre has the highest rate in the state and one of the highest in the country at 33. Watertown has the lowest obesity rate of our big cities at 24, and Spearfish has an obesity rate of 28. Compared to some of our neighboring cities in our neighboring states, Bismarck and Billings are at 28 and 29, whereas Billings and Minneapolis are lower at 26 and 25. The city with the highest rate of obesity in the country is Huntington, West Virginia, at 37, and the city with the lowest obesity rate in the whole country is Boulder, Colorado, at 15. Now, just 16 years ago, the rate in South Dakota was 13.9. So 16 years ago, the whole state of South Dakota was better than the best city now. So this just indicates the explosion that's taken place in our country over the past couple years. So South Dakota at 28 and the United States at 28. Okay, another topic. Oh, let me go back to obesity here. I'd be remiss if I wouldn't mention that obesity is not just something you get alone, but it also predisposes people to hypertension, diabetes, cancer, hypertension, stroke, liver and gallbladder disease, respiratory disease, osteoarthritis, and economic and social consequences as well. And the prevention, shouldn't mention this in a restaurant, but it's eating more fruits and vegetables, eating less fat, eating less sugar, more activity, breastfeed your baby, walk a lot, and promote healthy communities so we can live in communities that promote health. And guess what? It's summer in South Dakota again, and West Nile is back. West Nile has returned. This is one of the emerging diseases in the United States that has settled in South Dakota. It's made itself at home here. This slide just gives some history of it. Started in 2002, this disease emerged in South Dakota, and over the past 11 years, it's made itself endemic or entrenched here in the state. We've had nearly 2,000 human cases, and of those, nearly 400 with neuroinvasive disease, and 29 deaths. And the Great Plains of the United States have the highest West Nile rate in the country, if not the world. These little dots represent the cases of West Nile last year during 2012, which was a fairly heavy year. And you can see South Dakota is literally buried in dots, or at least eastern South Dakota is. Eastern South Dakota was inundated with people with West Nile last year. Out here in the Black Hills area, much less so. However, we did have West Nile cases here last year. So far this year, in 2012, the West Nile season has started. We've had 2 human cases already in Buffalo County and in Jones County. We've had a blood donor, a person who gave blood in Minnehaha County and discovered that they were perfectly healthy, but they were carrying the West Nile virus. We've had a West Nile positive bird up in Aberdeen, and we've had positive mosquitoes in Brookings, Aberdeen, and Pierre. So West Nile is here in South Dakota, so please take precautions. Nationally so far this year, 20 states have had West Nile detections, and 7 states have had human detections, and they include South Dakota, Colorado, California, Nevada, Texas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. This shows, and just so I can underscore our situation here in South Dakota, the graph shows, and I know you can't read it, but across the bottom are the names of the states. Overall last year, the rate of a neuroinvasive West Nile disease was 0.9 per 100,000 population. And look over here. Here's where we are in South Dakota. We're at 7.5 cases. So we had the highest rate of neuroinvasive disease in South Dakota last year, and that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. Next highest was, North Dakota, right up to our north, and then it goes down, down, down. So the Dakotas are really hit hard by West Nile. And this map is a culmination of all the years of West Nile in the United States, starting in 1999 when it entered the country in New York City and then spread west. And you can see here that the Great Plains, especially the northern Great Plains, have suffered the greatest burden here in the United States. Oh, let me go back to this slide here. And what's interesting, when West Nile first hit in 1999, the thought was, well, here's an African virus that's come to the United States. It's probably not even going to survive the first winter up in New York and New England. It may die out. We don't really know what's going to happen. And then after that, it started spreading a little east and a little south. And then the thought was, well, it's going to get in these swampy states in the south here, like Florida. And look at Florida last year, southern Florida, where all those swamps in the Everglades are 0 cases down there. Whereas up here in the Great Plains, and we had a drought up here last year. There were few mosquitoes, but the mosquitoes we do have, the Culex tarcellus, doesn't mind drought. It finds a way to breed, and it certainly finds a way to invite people. So this is the whole history of West Nile. The darker your county is, the more West Nile you have, and wow, South Dakota is hit hard by this. So take care of yourself. Now, if we drill down a step lower into just the state, now each county, each dot is one person who's had West Nile disease. Every county in South Dakota has had somebody with West Nile disease. And I can't prove it statistically, but I swear every family in South Dakota has had a relative or knows somebody 2 degrees of separation with West Nile disease. So this has hit our state hard. Most cases here in Brown County with 239 dots or 239 cases in Brown County, including 2 deaths. We're now in Lawrence County, out here on the western edge, and Lawrence County has had 39 cases. However, the county just south of us, Pennington County, has had 179 cases with 5 deaths. And this is over the whole history of West Nile in South Dakota. And the Lawrence County cases, off the top of my head, I think we've had only 1 or 2 up here in Lead because of the high altitude is somewhat protective. Most of the Lawrence County cases have been spearfish folks. Who does West Nile hit? Well, this is an age chart here. Across the horizontal axis are the ages in years, starting with the babies at birth and then going up to our oldest case was 69 years of age. And you can see from this, anyone, any age can get West Nile disease. In fact, we've had babies whose mothers have had West Nile disease and they've been born infected with the virus. The red are the neuroinvasive diseases. That's the worst kind. That's the encephalitis and the meningitis. So that hits you hard. That'll send you to the hospital. It'll put you in a coma. It really hits. The blue is West Nile fever. That's fever, a headache. You just feel crappy for a long time. And then unfortunately, the black is the people who have died from West Nile disease. West Nile fever, peaking out at 43 years of age. West Nile neuroinvasive disease, the median age is 51. But people who die, median age is, yes?
If you get West Nile, can you get it again?
You probably can. And the question was, once you get it, are you immune? At the beginning of West Nile, when it first came, the dogma was, yeah, you get lifelong immunity. But what we've seen is we've had people that have gotten sick back in the early 2000s with West Nile, and now in 2012, they're getting it again. They're testing positive. They're very sick with it. So we may be rewriting dogma here. So the jury's still out on this. Remember, this is an emerging disease. It's been in the United States less than 15 years, and we don't know everything about it. There's still no vaccine. There's still no direct treatment for it. So a new disease, an emerging disease. When does it hit? Okay, across the x-axis, the bottom axis here, we have the months of the year. Like, for example, we're now here in J2, the second week in July, J3, J4, and then August 1. We start out there in May and go through October. The peak week for getting sick with West Nile in South Dakota is the first week in August. But remember, you don't get bit tonight and then get sick tomorrow. There's an incubation period. The mosquito bites you, and then the virus grows in you and may make you sick anywhere from 3 days later to 2 weeks later. So the mosquito is biting you now out here in week 3, and then you're probably getting sick out here the first week in August. So the time to protect yourself is now. In fact, 83% of all our cases of West Nile in South Dakota were between the 15th of July and the 15th of September. So right now, here in the second week in August, we're building up, and the worst is yet to come in our state for this year. And then we'll reach August, and then it'll go down, down, down until we hit October. And then once we get that first hard killing frost, the mosquitoes will die and we'll be done. So, West Nile, how to prevent it? Limit your time outdoors. especially during the evening and the night hours when the mosquitoes are biting. Wear protective clothes, get good screens on your housing, sleep under a bed net if you're going to be sleeping out in your porch, avoid infested areas, and then discourage those mosquitoes from biting. Use repellents with DEET, Picardin, oil of lemon eucalyptus, or that IR 3535, which is in the Skin So Soft that they now make, and then control the mosquitoes by eliminating standing water where they can breed, and community-wide larval control and adulticidal spraying. And there's another bad disease that's spread not by mosquitoes but by ticks. So I've talked about one disease, West Nile, where we're hit hard in South Dakota. Now, not to scare you away, because we have long, hard winters in South Dakota, and we like our summertime to be outdoors. But Lyme disease, another emerging disease, is not hitting South Dakota as hard. But look at our poor neighboring state of Minnesota, where they have over 1,000 Lyme disease cases per year. In South Dakota last year, we had 4 cases of Lyme disease. And we interview every one of those cases to find out where they've been and when they've been. And they've all had travel outside of South Dakota, by and large to Minnesota, to the forested region, sometimes to New York State or someplace in the east where they've gotten infected. So this is an emerging disease that we do not have in South Dakota, thankfully. Another emerging disease is HIV and AIDS. This graphic shows a map of the United States and shows the states of the rates of people living with diagnosed HIV infection. The darker your state is, the higher your rates of infection are, and the lower and the lighter the color, the lower the rate of infection is. And you can see that South Dakota is a low incidence state for HIV. In fact, we have the 5th lowest rate in the whole country. HIV, I mention this because HIV has redefined public health and medical care in the United States. So South Dakota is among the lowest, whereas states in the highest rate are New York State, Maryland, and Florida. So I encourage everybody between the ages of 13 and 64 to know your HIV status and take precautions. Other emerging diseases on our horizon, we're always on the lookout for these. And the graphic here shows the newest culprit in China, the H7N9 influenza. That's made many people sick, especially in the Shanghai area. And this is a newly emerged virus, combination of influenza genes from domestic ducks, wild ducks, and poultry like chickens, infecting humans in China. We don't know what's going to happen with this disease. We're alert and we're watchful, and when influenza season hits again, once the weather starts cooling down in October, we really don't know what will happen. Other emerging infectious disease are the swine flu. Last year in Indiana and Ohio, they had large outbreaks of swine flu, typically associated with pigs giving the disease to people at state and county fairs. You may remember SARS of about 10 years ago. Now there's a new one sort of like it called MERS in Saudi Arabia. And we're really being watchful for that now, especially as Muslims around the world prepare for the upcoming Hajj in October. Hantavirus, an emerging disease. West Nile, Ebola, mad cow, and a new viral disease that's hitting a lot of people in a lot of different ways, norovirus. Now to wind up, let's just look at some death rates in South Dakota here. Again, I have 100 years worth of data here showing not the number of deaths, but the crude death rate, which is just the number of deaths divided by the population times 100,000. And it shows a fair amount of jumping up and down across the years, but if you zero in on it, it's fairly stable. But the thing that really jumps out here is the big spike back in 1918, which was, of course, the big Spanish flu influenza pandemic. So that really is noticeable, even in South Dakota. We had many people die from that, and that's what we work so hard to prevent, is a big spike of any kind of disease back here in our time. So we're glad to have that almost 100 years behind us. So let's just take a quick look and not go quite back 100 years, but just one generation back, back to 1991, about 20 years ago, and look at the causes of death. And then the next slide will be the causes of death just last year, so we can compare the difference. So just take a quick glance at that. The leading causes of death 20 years ago were heart disease, cancer, stroke, lower respiratory disease, which would be things like emphysema, influenza, pneumonia, accidents, diabetes. Now, fast forward 20 years, about one generation, and see how things have changed. Cancer is now the leading cause of death in South Dakota. We've had a dramatic decrease in the number of heart disease cases, not only in South Dakota, but across the United States. Cancer has shown a small increase, and that's brought it up at least last year to the #1 killer in South Dakota. And what we've also seen is Alzheimer's. 20 years ago, Alzheimer's wasn't even on our top 10 causes of death in this state, and now it's number, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Accidents is high. Accidents has increased over the past, or accidental death has increased over the past 20 years. The number of diabetes-associated deaths has doubled over the past years. The number of influenza and pneumonia deaths has decreased. But you just can't look at 2 years, even though they're 20 years apart, and make any good comparisons. We need a good epidemiologist, somebody like Heidi Moline, to come and analyze the data and figure out what the trends are. So where does South Dakota stand nationally with death rates? Well, the map shows by color. The states with the lowest color have the lowest death rates, and those with the highest color have the highest death rates. And I always wonder, is there an association here with obesity? Some of the states with the highest obesity rates also have the highest death rates. Here in South Dakota, we have the 17th highest age-adjusted death rate. The lowest rate is in Hawaii, and the highest rate is in the state of West Virginia. With our death rates, we have a big problem in South Dakota with disparity. Our American Indian population, unfortunately, is plagued by early death. Early death, especially due to accidental death in South Dakota, is causing a big disparity. We have 70% of American Indians in South Dakota die before they reach their 70th birthday, whereas only 25% of whites die before their 70th birthday. And causes of this disparity are accidents and chronic diseases causing to premature and early death. Early death among American Indians is preventable, and it is unacceptable. So with that, I'll turn it back to Kara, and we'll see if there's any questions.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. And now we're going to open up to questions. Because we are webcasting this, I need you to get my attention, so you ask your question into the microphone, okay? So I will be the roving Oprah.
I'd like to ask you a question about your reporting of disease and statistics in the general press. I realize you have problems with privacy for people, but every year, every season, we get the reports that scare the hell out of us, particularly if you're in your 70s, as I am, because you don't report on things like compromised immune systems with Lyme disease, people who are smokers, people who are heavy drinkers, and so forth, or any other contributing factors. We don't know. We just know that statistically there will be X amount of infections with certain viruses. Got anything that you can offer us so we don't get so freaked out every year when the stats come out?
We do collect that data, and those are risk factor data. And in public health, all our case names and different things are confidential, so we keep it all very close, and then we circle back, though, and we contact the patient, and we ask them risk factors, where you were, what you ate, and it all depends on what disease the person is reporting. We have about 90 diseases, infectious diseases in South Dakota that are legally mandatorily reportable. So if you're stricken with a disease, your physician is obligated to report those, and then we either get the information from your physician or circle back and get you. So if you've had Lyme disease, we'll give you a call and we'll say, where have you traveled? What have you had? What have you done? Typically, we don't get that deep into it. However, our data kicks off a research study. Like people in the medical school, they would dig deeper. They would sample you. They would do a comprehensive chart review on you. They would do longer-term studies. What we do in public health is a snapshot of you're sick today, you're sick this week, this is where you live, this is how old you are. But it's the university level, the research level. They'll go and they'll do long-term follow-up on it to get that risk factor information back to you.
And I don't think the university level releases press releases after
No,
they gather that information.
They'll publish a scientific journal.
Right. Okay, we have another question here.
I have two questions. My first question has to do with tuberculosis and the incidence of tuberculosis in South Dakota as compared to the rest of the country. And then my second question is, are they doing any ongoing studies in the people who are working in the labs underground to see if there's any emerging diseases that might be affecting the people who are working in the lab here?
Okay, second question first. No, we're not. We're not. In fact, in the past, I've always been intrigued by lead because it's way up here in the mountain. The past is so interesting because of all the mining and the different occupation. Like out on the flat part of South Dakota, we're all farmers or living in town or something like that. And I always expect different disease rates, especially higher cancer rates, but looking at cancer rates for Lead and Lawrence County, I have not seen them. I haven't dug that deep. I've just done macro comparisons, and I haven't seen it. And as far as tuberculosis goes, tuberculosis used to be a bad problem here. In fact, about, 50 miles south of here in Custer, we have the state tuberculosis hospital. Now we have about 15 to 20 cases of active tuberculosis a year in the state of South Dakota. We're what we call a low incidence state. It's a rare disease. This year so far, we have 4 cases reported. Our biggest risks are foreign-born people, people born in different countries with lower level health status, and they come here and then they have tuberculosis. So it's a fight we're still fighting, but a fight I think we can win against TB.
Are there other questions? Okay, over here.
Are there cases of MRSA and VRSA in South Dakota? And if so, what is the state doing about it?
Yes, there are cases of MRSA, but no cases of VRSA yet. And MRSA is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And that's been so wicked. Just 30 years ago or so, our Staphylococcus, people would become have a staph infection, and they'd give them a fairly routine antibiotic, and it would go away. Well, due to overuse in antibiotics and misuse, resistance has developed, and now MRSA is common. It used to be a problem in the hospital. You'd go into the hospital, you'd have something, and you'd get infected with the MRSA. And now people are getting it in their communities. We've had outbreaks in South Dakota, right here in the Black Hills area, where wrestlers have gotten it from the wrestling mat, or basketball teams have gotten it from sharing towels in the locker room. And along with multi-drug resistant organisms, tuberculosis is now becoming a big problem. Some countries like India and South Africa have had multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And if that hits here in the United States and South Dakota, and then we could see a big resurgence in TB. So we've always got to be looking not just at the disease, but also at the antibiotics and the drugs that cure them.
I picked the wrong place to stand there. Any other questions from the audience? I have a bunch. If not, oh, you have more too? Well, I'm just wondering, Dr. Keitlinger, if you, when you look around a crowded room, are you able to really look and say, you know, certain diseases, certain germs are in this place? That you can just kind of just statistically say somebody here has?
No, of course not. You know, but when I visit the bathroom, you know, that's a good, you know, what kind of hygiene is taking place in the bathroom. I like to see a nice big sign there that says, please wash your hands, especially employees, before you go back to work. And I like to see that the sink has a good, you know, easy way to get water out, has soap there, has towels, and then you can open the door without recontaminating yourself. And because just simple hand washing, just something so basic, so primitive, so easy, is one of our best prevention measures that we could have. So first I'd look in the bathroom is where I'd look.
Okay. Other than the tick-borne illnesses in the summer as an increase of time for that, Lyme disease is what's in my head, and I know and I'm talking about West Nile,
Yeah.
especially in South Dakota. Is there any other types of diseases, especially tourism season, things that you see an increase in South Dakota?
Well, the bad tick that we have here is what we call the dog tick, the dermacentor tick. And it's about as big as your little fingernail when it's engorged with blood. And that can carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever or tularemia. And then one of the big tourist attractions, especially in this part of the state, is the prairie dog towns. Now, prairie dogs in South Dakota can carry tularemia. They can also carry plague. We've had big prairie dog die-offs in the state due to plague. And we have not had a human case of plague yet in the state. However, New Mexico, Colorado, places like that, typically every year they have. And I just really fear that we're going to have some tourist that's going to get too bold and want too close up of a picture and get themselves infected with either plague or tularemia due to a prairie dog.
Okay.
There's a question.
Okay, here's a question over here.
Rapid City is looking at allowing chickens in the city limits. What kind of diseases would they bring?
Chickens in the city limit.
Well, I don't know, what I would fear would be cockle-doodle-doo-itis. Like if you have a rooster that's just waking you up every morning. But, you know, really, seriously, diseases, well, you know, we've showed about avian influenza and bird flu, and I don't think that's such a problem because I know they keep the inner city flocks small. Is it 10 or 6 or 5?
It
3?
depends on the community.
Yeah.
Some are 3, some are 5, some are...
Yeah, so they're fairly well and a lot of people worry about the chicken poop. Well, you know, we have dogs in our towns too. And if people practice good hygiene methods with the chicken waste, you know, I think it's going to be okay. You know, we got to be mindful of it. And like this year now, there's a big outbreak of Salmonella typhimurium with baby chicks. 372 cases nationwide. Here in South Dakota, we've had 10 cases, and that's these baby chicks. You go into the feed stores or the farm stores, and you see the bins with the baby chicks, and then sometimes kids play with them and don't wash their hands after them. Well, that's obviously something that could happen. But if people want to raise chickens and they keep it clean, and it should be okay.
Okay, we have a question over here.
I just have a question about vaccines. What are your thoughts on vaccination, and where does South Dakota stand in terms of national vaccination rates? For children, yeah.
Oh, well, can I brag first and toot our horn?
Absolutely, toot your horn.
Okay, now, South Dakota has the highest vaccination rate for influenza in the country. And, you know, we give free vaccines for kids for influenza. But other than that, we don't do much. I think South Dakotans just take it on themselves to protect themselves from influenza. We've had very high vaccination rates for HPV, the human papillomavirus, or the cervical cancer vaccine. We've had some of the highest rates in the country for that. Back in 2005, we had the 6th highest vaccination rates for the childhood vaccinations, things like measles, tetanus, whooping cough, diphtheria, polio, that whole bunch. But in recent years, our rates have gone down. So our trend for vaccination is in the wrong direction. We're opening ourselves up to having people with some of these long gone diseases. Our neighboring state of Minnesota had over 4,000 whooping cough cases last year, and we only had about 70 here in South Dakota, but our rate is fairly low for the whooping cough vaccination. People got to remember those vaccines and make sure that you get your kids in before they get into daycare or go to kindergarten and get your vaccines. So we used to be really good, but we're losing ground in recent days.
Why is that? Why are we losing ground?
I don't know.
Okay.
I honestly don't know. And that's something we're, really working to find. I always blame the physician because it's the physician that should know this. Like, what parent knows, and I know we got some people in medical school in this room, and I point my finger at them because parents don't know. Your kid is 4 years old and 5 months, and they've already had about 10 shots, and you don't know which one, and it's all confusing. It's the doc and that nurse that have to know. So I place it squarely on the back of the physician. You've got to get your kids under your care, properly immunized.
So if we're seeing a decrease in the number of children's diseases vaccinations, and are we seeing an increase in those diseases in South Dakota?
For pertussis, we're not.
Okay.
And I think only by the grace of God we're not, because our neighboring state of Minnesota and Montana have very high rates of whooping cough, and we've been able to dodge the bullet on that. So, I don't like, these diseases to return that are, supposedly long gone because they're not eradicated from the world yet.
What about autism? Is that associated at all with vaccinations?
No. Back in the 1990s, there was an article in the Lancet on that by Wakefield, and that raised a lot of concern, and that whole article and scientific question has been completely debunked by many times, but it has in subsequent years become urban myth, and people still hang on to what they want to believe, I guess.
Okay, we have another question on this side.
Have there been any causes from the hantavirus in the state?
Yes. Hantavirus is a virus spread by mice in their urine and their feces and their nests. And about every year we have a case of hantavirus. And just this past year we had a child in southwestern South Dakota unfortunately die of hantavirus. Some years we've had 2 or 3 cases. So it's here, so the precaution is if you find a mouse living in your house or your garage or your old shed out back, don't just get a broom and start sweeping it out. Take and squirt it with some bleach water, open up all the windows, and then very carefully kind of wipe it up. Otherwise, you'll spread the dust around and you'll get infected with the hantavirus.
Okay, we have another question over here.
Regarding West Nile disease, the individuals that are seeing a second incidence of the disease, is it a second infection or is it recurrence? And in those cases, are their symptoms worse or less so than the first time?
What we're seeing, and we're seeing very few of these, however, we're seeing enough just to be alarmed and then reporting that incidence on up to CDC. And we think they're new infections because people get a new mosquito bite, 5 years after the first time they were sick, and we measure it looking at different antibody responses. One of the antibodies called immunoglobulin M rises to acute infection, and we're seeing big spikes in that in people's blood. So that indicates they've got a current infection of that disease, and they are getting sick, however, not as sick. But then, as I answered the first gentleman here, is we're the health department, and we work all these diseases, and we just grab information, what's happening right here and now. What we really need is we need somebody in the university to follow up on these cases and follow them through time. The University of South Dakota here a couple years ago did a good study. They took all the West Nile cases in southeast South Dakota and then gave them a free ride to Sioux Falls and Vermilion, and they gave them like physical tests, how fast you could run and reach and your cognitive behavior. And they were able to show that years after people had and not neuroinvasive disease, but just West Nile fever, there were long-term effects, not just physically, but also just mentally and depression and people's just ability. West Nile is, I don't know, people are getting complacent now. The first year people were hysterical and now we're complacent. But it's here again for the summer, so between now and early October, just protect yourself.
We have time for just a couple of more questions, so grab my attention. Before we do that, let me just say we do have some door prizes we'll be drawing for in just a few minutes. So if you have not entered, contact somebody in one of these blue shirts and they'll get you signed up and your name in the box. And we have another question right here.
We're all very aware of the difference between East River and West River, but as I was looking at your charts, it's like some of the diseases are separated in many ways by the 100th meridian, which pretty much is where the river is. To the west of that, western United States, very arid. To the east of that is very humid. How much, when you're taking statistics for the state, might be skewed by the fact that we have these two very, very different climates?
And that's the very reason we try and break everything down by county. So we always look at the county, and the thing I always see is not the 100th meridian, but that James River Valley in there, starting up at Brown County and going down through Huron, Mitchell, on out to Yankton. That seems to, take the pounding of a lot of different diseases. And then we have the more chronic diseases. We see higher rates of disease, especially in our Indian reservation counties, where chronic disease is more common. Things like diabetes and obesity on some of the reservation counties. But yeah, and I don't want to say it's healthier to live West River than East River, but we do see a big disease difference.
Flu and cold season isn't that far away. I hate to say summer's almost over, but and you talked about hygiene, personal hygiene really helps. Can you be too clean when it comes to flu and cold season? I know my children's teachers, they wipe down the desks, they sanitize everything, and then does that cause a problem?
Well, in school I don't think so. A lot of people feel visiting the farm and having a pet or a dog reduces things like asthma, gives people a good constant exposure to germs and helps you fight them. That's still part of the scientific debate that's going on. So now in public health, we tell people, wash your hands. If you have diarrhea, wash yourself, take care. Don't swim if you have diarrhea. When flu season comes, get your flu shot. Just use normal, prudent things to protect yourself.
Okay, one more question here.
My question is sort of related. When I fly, it seems like I'm always surrounded by people who are hacking and coughing, so I've taken to wearing a mask when I fly, which embarrasses my husband to death. And he says it's not really helping me at all. It just makes me feel better. Is there any benefit in wearing a mask?
If it's just a plain surgical mask, no, probably not. But if it's an N95 respirator, the one that really fits tightly and has a good filter on it to filter out viruses, and then yes. And I do the same thing. I don't wear the mask unless the person next to me is coughing and hacking or the person behind me. But I carry an N95 in my backpack and I whip it out. So.
Okay, one more question.
Okay, so I had a question actually also relating to the flu and flu shots and everything. I've always been sort of a little skeptical. I do get my flu shots, but I'm always a little skeptical because I know there's hundreds and hundreds of strains. And you can really only vaccinate against maybe 5 or 6 or whatever. You can't vaccinate against all of them. So how do you pick which ones to choose?
Up until this year, there's been 3 viral components that have been in the flu shot, 2 A components and 1 B component, an AH1 and an AH3. So it's 3, and those are typically the ones that circulate. And it's always an educated guess at the end of the past flu season what's going to be circulating next year. This year, or this coming flu season, will be the first year that we've had what we call a quadrivalent season, where we'll have 2 A viruses and 2 B viruses represented in the flu vaccine. But all those hundreds of things, you got to think of all the rhinoviruses, all the coronaviruses, all the para-influenza viruses. It's respiratory season. People are suffering from a lot of things respiratory-wise, RSV, especially little kids. But the worst of the worst is influenza. So get yourself protected from that.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Keitlinger, for coming, and
Thank you. Thank you.
appreciate it. I need to do, while we're gathering up door prize names and stuff, again, quick, if you haven't entered, do that right now. But I want to be sure and thank Mike and Tammy here at the Bumping Buffalo. Thank you for allowing us in here today. And thank you very much to the staff, the wait staff, and the cooks, and everybody for doing such a great job. Thank you so much. I'll introduce the South Dakota Public Broadcasting staff: Ruth Bylander, Dave Foote, Brian Gevick over here. We have Chase Christensen over here. Allison McNamara is somewhere in the back. Steve Munson over here running engineering for us as well, so thank you very much. I also need to thank the John T. Vakurovic Foundation for funding us to be here and paying for it, so thank you. Anybody here on the Friends Board of South Dakota Public Broadcasting, the Friends Board, any Friends members? Members of SDPB, if you're here, thank you for coming. We appreciate that as well. So now, first off, I have a thank you gift for you, which is a mug and a pen and a hat. So thank you very much for coming, and he'll take the microphone. And then we're going to draw for our door prizes. We have 3 door prizes. First one is a Nova hat and a DVD of the Antiques Roadshow that was filmed here or filmed in Rapid City, plus the behind-the-scenes DVD as well. So that's first. Dr. Keitlinger, I need you to be my drawer. We're going to draw for 3. So the first one is
Owen.
Heyer. Owen Heyer from Spearfish. Is Owen here? Okay, Owen, great. Congratulations. You want to take that back to him? There you go. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Keitlinger, the next prize is a National Parks puzzle, a pen, and a 1-year membership to the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
The winner is Jean Carmanian.
Thank you. Okay, and one more. We have a hat, a pen, a keychain, and a 1-year membership to the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Heather Moline.
Is this the lucky table over here? Thank you. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming and participating. Enjoy the rest of Neutrino Day here. Thank you.